We had a really remarkable morning. I just want to thank Meng for setting the field for all of us in making it clear how simple it is to actualize kindness. And then we've moved through various phases, including this vision of how we can turn our genes on and off. And it was fascinating, the presentation that Steve and Melissa gave. Also, Sherry's extraordinary interaction with Soren, where we get this sense of how fundamental it is to be relational. And then Leah set us up for something very particular, and that was the value and the path of self-awareness, of becoming aware of who we really are, which means that we shift our attention a little bit away from how the world looks outside of us, and we bring our attention inward. I just thought her presentation was beautiful. I would love to give her another hand. And then, Dan is in the mix of it all, again, around this issue of relationship, but he points very much toward the profound value of the inner relationship as well as relationship with the so-called outside world. So I'd like to spend just a few moments in directing our attention inward, if that is okay. Just for a few moments so that we can begin to allow ourselves to settle. And then what I'd like to do is to begin to unpack a little bit about compassion and why it's such a radical act in today's world. So may I suggest that iPads, pens, pencils, paper, we just put it all down for a moment. And even if your tradition is Tibetan Buddhist, I'd like to ask you to actually close your eyes for just a moment. And take a really deep breath, giving volume to your torso. And moving your attention into your feet. And allowing some moments of just feeling connected to this earth. We've been pretty upregulated and very external over the past few hours. And let's just shift things down a little bit. And this feeling of stability when we're really grounded, that sense is very important in our lives today as we encounter the world and the world encounters us. And notice if you want to move into distraction. And just bring yourself back through the breath, body, to the feet, the sense of your feet on this earth. And shift your attention gently to your back. Which is a kind of physical metaphor for the quality of mind that allows you to uphold yourself in the midst of many conditions. Strong back. And shifting your attention to the front part of the body, really open to the world. As the back exemplifies equanimity, touching into the front part of this body, exemplifying compassion. Strong back, soft front. So open your eyes softly and bring in the world as it is. Just these few moments of touching in. And then I ask us to maybe bring our hands together and just like gathering our mind, offering a lot of gratitude to our speakers this morning. Thank you. So I, like Sherry Turkle and others who have spoken this morning, feel a profound appreciation for our technology. The fact that podcasts of Dharma talks can be downloaded for free from many sites, that we can share and friend and unfriend, that we can leave notes, we can have maps, that trace our whereabouts, that we can start Google Plus groups where those of us who, for example, in engaged Buddhism, who want to connect and hear from each other and really to understand about the development today of a Buddhism that's engaged. There's a place where we can go. And at the same time, I feel that some of the things that were said this morning are also very powerful for us to consider, because these are relatively new technologies. And these are technologies that we don't understand entirely how they are not only shaping the architecture of the brain and therefore the mind, our nervous systems, our bodies, but also our relationships. So this talk this morning is briefly about compassion, and it's called radical compassion. Radical because of the word radical, meaning root, the root of our lives, the root of our lives being our relationality. And even though it's said that we are born alone and we die alone, and even though there's a kind of loneliness in the world today, our health and the health of our planet is truly based not only in our capacity to be relational, but to be in relationships that are characterized by mutuality, by kindness, and by compassion. And I want to be able to be so close to you that I can see your pupils dilate and constrict. I want to be able to see the blood in your face flush and withdraw as I'm interacting. I want to feel the warm touch of your hand. And I also appreciate the fact that so many people reach through to me through the technology. Digital natives, this is young people all over the world, and as well old schoolmates who suddenly, find me on Facebook and say, hey, let's get together for a martini. And I'm like, I think I outgrew that about 70 years ago. So I want to talk about certain elements of compassion because in looking at compassion and in endeavoring to engender compassion, particularly among medical people, in giving this a lot of feeling into and a lot of thought, a lot of inquiry into people's lives, I discovered that compassion is actually something that can't be trained directly in most people, and that it's also comprised of non-compassion elements. And the fascinating thing and the concerning thing is that somehow our technology is making it a little more difficult for us to actualize radical, principled, and healthy compassion. And I know that that's not the best news, but we actually can put our hand on the tiller and shift things within our own heart and mind. So that compassion, which is really essential, not only in the civil world, but as Dan said, in terms of planetary cultural health, that this can be realized. So there are certain elements of compassion that are primed, that are fed, that are cultivated, that actually feed this process that we call compassion. And the first one is attention. And we heard about attention earlier, and I appreciate you giving me your attention. I deeply appreciate that. And the usual way that we cultivate attention is by turning our attention inward. This is the healthy way, to actually allow for the regulation of the body and the mind in a quality that Leah exemplified, which is bringing her attention into her own personal experience. And we've learned also from social psychology and neuroscience that affect or our feelings bias attention. And so this piece that Mang brought to us this morning that I thought was so beautiful, that we can intentionally actually grow the sense of kindness within our experience, is something that I think is important for all of us, because we're inundated with a tremendous amount of negativity, both violence in terms of the images that we see, and also profound pessimism that is present among many young people and in the world today. And we want to bias our attention in a way that engenders pro-sociality, not constriction, not withdrawal, but the courage and actually the longing for genuine relationship. So attention and affect, and it's called pro-social affect. There's plenty of affect around. A lot of it is not entirely social, but pro-social affect. Compassion, kindness, gratefulness, the capacity to forgive, the sense of joy, not only in our own lives, but when good things happen to other people. These kinds of qualities are so nourishing in our lives. And as Mang has said in his search inside, which I think is such a brilliant name for your book, Mang, he says, look inside. This is where you're going to find the treasure that allows you to be in relationship. A whole other domain is really important, and I would suggest that most of the people in this room have this in, great quantities, and also more is to be explored, and that is this capacity to engender intention or a motivation that is based on unselfishness. And I love what Norman Fisher said about enlightenment. He said enlightenment is basically being unselfish. It's a wonderful view. So there are cognitive processes that are very important for us to cultivate as we consider the possibility of creating a greater base of compassion in our lives. And one of those qualities has to do with having a powerful ethical and moral base, or the development of moral character. and the engendering of moral sensitivity. And that is really based in a vision that has faith or confidence in the well-being of the possibility of well-being in this world. And other features are important at the cognitive level. For example, being able to take a metacognitive perspective instead of being in a situation of high reactivity, being triggered easily. Or one that seems very counterintuitive, and that is the ability to really distinguish self from other. Because somehow in the New Age world or certain kind of spirituality, the emphasis is on non-duality or on oneness, which is important. But there's another dimension, which I know very much from my work in the prison system and also with dying people, that at a certain level, for me not to get so upregulated, so empathically over-aroused that I experience personal distress, it's important for me to actually distinguish. I'm sitting with a person in incredible pain. I'm in affective resonance with their pain. I feel their pain, but this person also is not me. So that very subtle distinction is important in terms of how we're able to actualize a quality of kindness and caring or compassion that is sustainable. Other dimensions include things like knowing the truth of impermanence. So I remember once sitting with a young man who had AIDS-related lymphoma, and he had had this profound insight into the nature of impermanence, and he was sharing that with me. And then several weeks later, I was back at Upaya, and he called me and he said he was admitted into the hospital and he was suffering from intractable pain. And he said to me, if he didn't see the truth of impermanence, there would be no way that he could sustain the pain that he was experiencing. So seeing how things change, shift from moment to moment is a really important component in the actualization of compassion. And another component that is very, again, against the stream, it seems kind of paradoxical, but let me just share this with you. That as much as we want a good outcome in the world that we're working in, whether it's in the prison system or end-of-life care field or with homeless people or in politics, we give our best in all cases. But what is so essential is, on the other hand, to not be attached to outcome. And that's really hard. But what we've learned is that an attachment to outcome, if you're driving at any cost toward an objective that you think is the right objective, that usually your objective doesn't get realized, number one. Two, the second thing is that often the path to your objective, so to speak, is one that ends up creating more harm than you ever thought it could. And so this quality of openness and being with things as they are, at the same time giving your best to the situation, allows for futility to drop away. And that is really, really important in our work. And there's another stream that primes compassion. You know, I've addressed the attentional, the affective, the feeling, the ethical, the cognitive. But there's another stream, and that stream has to do with these bodies. And it's a really powerful stream, because so often this world of technology, we become less and less embodied. We become more, what could I say, displaced into our technology. And I want to tell you about a little meeting that I went to years ago where Tanya Singer, who's a neuroscientist, made a kind of footnote about research she had done with people who were suffering from alexithymia, which is an autism-related disorder. And she noted that individuals who suffer from alexithymia have this capacity to not read, not be able to track their own visceral processes, or they don't have the capacity to track their own visceral processes. And similar to that, they're not able to feel into or to be empathic or sense into the experience of another. And she mentioned that similar neural networks were involved in both processes: interoceptivity, that is being able to read your own body, your own visceral processes, and empathy, being able to sense into the experience of another. And when she said that, I was just thunderstruck. I thought first about the many physicians and nurses that I've worked with over the past 40 years who are so dissociated from their bodies. I thought also about the world of technology, where we are entering into quite passive states often in relation to our physical experience. And I thought about what is happening in our medical system, which has been characterized as a compassion deficit disorder or increasing compassion deficit. And then I realized how this is true not only of clinicians, but so many people in our culture. And that part of the work that we're doing and that John Kabat-Zinn does in the mindfulness-based stress reduction work is to invite us into a greater experience of embodiment. That capacity to be embodied, to actually realize or sense into our own visceral processes, allows us to sense into the experience of others. And then there's engagement. What we call in my world engaged Buddhism or compassionate action. And all of these features that are attentional, affective, cognitive, ethical, and embodied prime in a very dynamic way that is nonlinear the emergence of this relational treasure that we call compassion. So my deep aspiration or deep wish for our world is that we discover a way that our technology actually enables greater compassion and relationality in our world. I'm looking, as Meng did in his wonderful book, for ways in which technology becomes a pathway into intimacy and into kindness and into radical compassion, and not an obstacle to it. And I know there are many engineers here and people who are in the technology field, and I invite you to come together and to really look in the spirit that Sherry Turkle has looked, that Meng, that Dan, that Leah has looked inside, is searching inside, to find ways where we can bring this forward in our world today, as our world is so fragile, imperiled, and at the same time we're in this moment of extraordinary intimacy and in a profound phase shift. So thank you very much.